If you need me to stop at some point, Carlos, so that you can, you know, um, do the translation, please just don't be afraid to just say stop.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
I know how hard that must be.
Okay. So thank you for that. I'm letting people in now.
All right.
Muy bien, hola a todos, bienvenidos a esta entrevista con el gran gurú del retail, Doug Stephens. Lo tenemos aquí de vuelta. Bueno, y con mucho gusto
Hola.
de poder escucharlo, de poder aprender de él en un momento en el que verdaderamente, pues todos lo necesitamos. Así que en un momento vamos a arrancar, vamos a dar tiempo, vamos a dar un par de minutos para comenzar, pero bueno, previamente a presentarles a nuestro invitado del día de hoy, me encantaría comenzar con una breve introducción de por qué hacemos esta conversación. Primero porque, pues, gracias a la conexión virtual y gracias a que logramos conocer a Doug, pues podemos tener la posibilidad de hablar con uno de los futuristas del comportamiento del consumidor más importantes en el mundo. Pero además de ello, porque todos sabemos que estamos saliendo o queremos estar saliendo de esta experiencia de pandemia que puso a muchas industrias a sufrir, no se diga en muchos otros aspectos de la vida. Sin embargo, pues estamos en una de las industrias que se ha visto más transformada y más impactada por todo esto, que es el retail. Así que, sin más, voy a presentarles a nuestro invitado del día de hoy, a quienes ustedes ya tienen, pues muchos de ustedes ya tienen el placer de conocer. Incluso he conversado con muchos de ustedes que tienen su libro o alguno de sus libros y que ya han estudiado un poquito de lo que plantea. Así que les presento un poquito de quién es nuestro invitado del día de hoy. Doug Stephens es uno de los futuristas más importantes en la industria de retail. Su trabajo ha influenciado pues muchas de las marcas de retail más importantes del mundo, con nombres como Walmart, Google, L'Oreal, BMW, entre muchas otras. Antes de fundar su consultoría llamada Retail Prophet, el profeta del retail, Doug trabajó por más de 20 años en la industria de retail, teniendo posiciones de liderazgo internacional. Doug es escritor de 3 libros ya, de hecho 4 libros ya, pero bueno, él ha escrito libros como Reengineering Retail, redefiniendo el retail, el futuro de las ventas en un mundo post-digital, así como un libro anterior que se llama The Retail Revival, reimaginando el negocio en una nueva era de consumo. Actualmente acaba de publicar su libro Resurrecting Retail. ¿Cómo hacerle para hacer que el retail resurja? El futuro de los negocios en un mundo post-pandemia. Además, Doug ha sido invitado a varios medios como The New York Times, la BBC, TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal y Fast Company. Así que we're very glad to have here with us Doug Stephens. Doug, thank you for being here.
Carlos, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone.
Ok, so la forma en la que esta conversación funcionará, yo le haré las preguntas a Doug en inglés, me dará su respuesta y después yo traduciré para que todos pues puedan aprovechar esta conversación. So Doug, let me start with the first question. We're trying to go out, or we believe we're going out of this pandemic. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're going back, but we want to think that we're going out. The first question I want to ask you is, what's going to stick? What's going to stay the way it is or the way it has been in the past months?
Sure. That's a great question. And I think, Carlos, everyone has been trying to figure that out, as we have gone through this together. But we do get some clues. I mean, first of all, we know from the field of psychology that it takes about 66 days for a person to form or break a new habit. about 66 days. And this has been proven conclusively, through study. By the time we come out of this, and, Mexico may be different than Canada, and Canada may be different than the UK or the US, who knows? But generally speaking, the population globally, by the time we rise out of the crisis, will have had their behavior changed for upwards of 400 to 500 days. All right, so we can expect that there will be some new habits, new tendencies and preferences that are formed. That's number one. So maybe I'll let you convey that first, and then we'll talk about the second point.
Lo primero que nos dice Doug es que los estudios demuestran que para cambiar un hábito o un comportamiento de las personas se requieren 66 días. Y él estaba respondiendo a mi pregunta acerca de qué comportamientos o qué cambios se van a quedar después de la pandemia. Muchos deseamos que las cosas regresen a como estaban. Y lo que nos dice Doug es, bueno, si se requieren 66 días para un cambio de comportamiento, para un cambio de hábitos, hay que tomar en cuenta que las personas, para cuando salgamos de esta pandemia, van a tener de 400 a 500 días de un comportamiento diferente. Así que imagínense qué tanto habrá un cambio de comportamiento. Yes.
And the second thing is we can gather some information as well from the past. So if we look at China, for example, in 2002, China's e-commerce market at that time was virtually non-existent. Most commerce, the vast majority of commerce was transacted in physical stores in the Chinese market. And then SARS hit in 2002 and 2003. And what we saw in China at the time was that the Chinese economy quickly ramped up to digital capability. Companies like Alibaba and JD.com, these giants today, were born out of that crisis. Consumers very quickly adapted to this new digital reality because literally China was locked down because of SARS. I mean, we think the lockdowns here have been bad. In China in 2002, 2003, it was tremendous, So from that point on, the Chinese economy in terms of online activity went basically like this. It just went parabolic. And today, as I speak with you now, the Chinese economy is 52% e-commerce, 52%. And
wow.
It shows you how quickly this has happened in a couple of decades. So to answer your question directly, I think that number one, we know that from a behavioral science standpoint, that this crisis has protracted long enough that we are likely to see some very major and serious behavioral change on the part of consumers. We know from the Chinese experience that once a country crosses that digital threshold, there's no going back. We're likely to see more and more growth on the digital side of retail. And I think there's one last thing too that we have to appreciate, and that is that, for some people, this crisis and the isolation that this crisis has caused has been very difficult. People who really enjoy being with other people, they enjoy office environments, they enjoy being out in public, going shopping at shopping centers, etc. But I think there's also a percentage of the population for whom this has actually brought them closer to the kind of lifestyle that they would like, that they enjoy working from home, that they don't necessarily need to be in a crowded nightclub or a bar or a movie theater. So there's also that, that this is the lifestyle that some people would prefer to live. So I think we're going to see significant behavioral and consumer change when this is over.
Okay. Así que Doug nos dice lo siguiente, nos dice, podemos aprender del pasado. Entre otras cosas, Doug cita lo que ocurrió en China en 2002. En 2002, en China prácticamente no existía el e-commerce, no existía la economía digital. Pero en ese momento fueron impactados por la pandemia o la epidemia en ese momento del SARS. Bueno, en China el nivel de cierre, el nivel de cuarentena fue extraordinario y de ese momento en adelante cambiaron tanto los hábitos de comportamiento en China que nos dice Doug, al día de hoy, el 52% de la economía en China se ha convertido en una economía a través de e-commerce. Doug habla también acerca de que es cierto que hay personas que requieren regresar a un estilo de vida de socialización, de estar en la oficina, de estar en un bar, pero también existe un gran número de personas que han adoptado un nuevo estilo de vida a través de, pues básicamente han adoptado un estilo de vida estando de forma remota y de forma digital. Doug, let me ask you, in your book you talk about many aspects of life that are changing. You talk about education, you talk about transportation, you talk about working environments. What are your main insights on that? What do you think is going to change, and what effects are those changes going to have on the retail industry?
It's a great question. And you know, Carlos, sometimes we think, and I was just having this discussion with someone today, sometimes we feel when we talk about change, we talk about it in absolute terms, right? Will people go back to the office or not, right? Will consumers still shop in stores or not, right? But change in life is very rarely absolute, right? Things rarely change absolutely. But the truth is they don't need to change absolutely in order to change things significantly. So I was I did an informal survey just the other day online, and I asked people the question, do you expect once things go back to quote unquote normal and all restrictions are lifted, do you expect to be working from home more than you did pre-pandemic, or less than pre-pandemic, or about the same? 60% of respondents said more than pre-pandemic, working from home more than they would have normally worked from home. Now, if we think about that and we think about the effect of that, right? So let's for the sake of argument, let's be conservative. Let's say it's only 30%. Let's say 30% of people say, I'm going to be working from home more, and that means I'm not going to be commuting as much. Now think about all of the retail that is built along that path that consumers travel every day, the impact on fuel sales, the impact on convenience retail, the impact on out-of-home media systems, right? That's 30% fewer people driving by billboards, seeing digital signage, right? Being captivated by all of these marketing messages. So, and that's just one example, of how this pandemic could potentially disrupt this sort of industrial system that we've established. So, now let's multiply that across education and healthcare and transportation systems and travel. Let's assume that 20% of companies say, you know what, we're going to continue to do Zoom meetings rather than sending our executives on business class flights. What does that do to the airline industry? What does that do to airport retail? What does that do to hospitality if 20% fewer people are spending nights in hotels? What's the impact on conference facilities? So I mean, the ripple effect of this change is going to reverberate through the global economy, I think, for probably the next decade, as we sort of settle into these new behaviors.
Doug me responde, y voy a tratar de ser breve en la traducción. Dice, aunque el cambio no sea absoluto, el cambio puede ser significativo. No tenemos que preguntarnos, ¿la gente va a regresar a las oficinas o no? Aunque no todos se queden en casa trabajando, el porcentaje de gente que se quede en casa trabajando o que se quede en casa estudiando, apenas yo le compartí a Doug que mis sobrinos, ahora que tienen que regresar a la escuela físicamente, dicen, no quiero. Yo estaba muy contento en casa, cuando sabía que entre clases podía ir a la cocina y sacar algo del refrigerador, o sabía que cuando tenía un descanso me podía ir a hacer ejercicio. Ni siquiera todos los niños están deseosos de regresar. Entonces, lo que dice Doug es, imaginemos que no todo el mundo trabaja desde casa, pero que hay un porcentaje que lo hace. Él dice, imaginemos que un 30% de la gente decide trabajar desde casa. ¿Qué efecto tiene eso en todos los negocios que estaban basados en ese tránsito de personas, en las personas que se tenían que mover de su casa al trabajo. ¿Qué efecto tiene eso en las gasolinerías? ¿Qué efecto tiene eso en las tiendas de conveniencia? ¿Qué efecto tiene eso en los medios de publicidad exterior? 30%, 20%, 10% menos de gente por las calles que ven los espectaculares y los anuncios digitales en las calles. Todo eso es un efecto. Habla Doug acerca también del efecto que puede tener esta pandemia en los aeropuertos. Las empresas que han decidido que ya no van a hacer viajes para tener juntas, sino que los van a tener a través de Zoom, si reducen 10, 20, 30% sus viajes, eso implica 10, 20, 30% menos de no nada más transporte aéreo, sino también de tráfico en los aeropuertos, que sabemos que son uno de los mejores puntos de retail en el mundo. Okay, so I get it. There's going to be many changes. And I have a question for you. So we're losing traffic in physical retail, which is evident. Depending on the country, it might be 5, 20, 30, 50, whatever percent. Are we only losing, or what are we winning? Is there a trade-off here, or we're only losing traffic?
I think that there's no question that, we have sort of crossed the digital threshold now, right? And I think for a long time, the retail industry was sort of straddling the industrial world of retail and the digital world, and struggling to try and figure out how to bring these two things together in a cohesive way. But I think that the big realization, and it goes back to something that I talked about in my last book, and I revisited in Resurrecting Retail, is that physical experiences still do matter. There's no question. But what we do not need is the physical experience of going to a store to pick up a product and take it home. We don't need that experience anymore in our lives, because we've learned in a really short period of time that there's no need to do that. I can order virtually anything that I want and have it delivered to my home. And now that the pandemic has taken effect, we've seen the entire global retail industry now improve its capabilities and really become quite good at serving consumers online. So we will go to stores less as a means of product distribution, but it doesn't mean that there's no value to a physical store. And this is what I think, is really important for retailers to realize, is that physical stores now are really becoming a media channel. And the brands that understand that, and I'm thinking about brands like Nike, for example. Nike really understands that its physical stores are not necessary for the distribution of its products. Nike is already distributing about 40% of its products through direct-to-consumer channels, mostly digital. So they know that they don't need the Nike House of Innovation in New York or in Shanghai. They know that they don't need these Nike local stores in places like Los Angeles, but they use those as media outlets and as media assets in the market. They use them as service touch points. They use them as data gathering points to inform their decisions about their assortments and their inventory. So physical stores are less important from a distribution standpoint, there's no question, but they are more important than ever from a media standpoint. And that's particularly important today because the cost of digital media is becoming prohibitive for some brands. There are a lot of brands now that literally cannot afford to acquire new customers through digital channels because the cost of the customer is more than the customer is going to spend with the brand. So physical retail is still vitally important.
Le pregunté a Doug que si había alguna pérdida en esto y si había algún beneficio. Estamos perdiendo tráfico a los puntos de venta tradicionales por todo lo que platicó, por el cambio en la educación, el cambio en los viajes, el cambio en los hábitos de trabajo. si es que había algún beneficio. Y una respuesta que me da Doug es, la experiencia física sigue importando. Para todos los que están en retail pueden respirar, pero pueden respirar no porque tengan las cosas resueltas, sino porque hay un camino. Doug dice, la experiencia física sigue teniendo valor, pero ese valor ya no es el valor de distribución. En el pasado, una tienda física era el lugar para que yo hiciera una transacción y recibiera un producto por parte digamos, de una marca a un cliente. Hoy, el valor de una tienda no es ese. Hoy el valor de una tienda, dice Doug, es como un canal de medio, como un canal de publicidad, un medio para promover lo que ofreces, para dar servicio o para informar una decisión. Doug nos pone el ejemplo. Nike tiene el 40% de sus ventas en estrategias directas al consumidor, del cual la mayor parte es totalmente digital. Entonces dice, Nike sabe que no necesita una tienda en Nueva York o en Chicago o en ningún punto para distribución de productos, sino como un espacio de publicidad y de educación del cliente. Asimismo, Doug nos dice que el costo de la publicidad digital cada vez está subiendo más, justamente porque hay más demanda. Y que hay empresas para las cuales es más barato hacer publicidad o, digamos que, educar a sus clientes desde un punto de venta físico que lo que es desde un punto de venta o desde un medio digital para publicidad. Okay, so Doug, let me ask you another question. In your book, you talk about the apex predators. You talk about Amazon, Alibaba, JD.com, Walmart, who are these behemoths of companies that can actually have access to many industries, more than we actually think of. You talk about them going into healthcare and education and insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How the hell do we fight them?
Yeah. That's the operative question, isn't it? And you could add Mercado to that list as well. So it is true that, we look at companies like Amazon, and I'll just use Amazon as an example. We look at Amazon, who posted last quarter 46% growth in revenue. And it would be easy to assume that the pandemic has really been, a windfall for Amazon. And on the one hand, that is true. But on the other hand, if you're Jeff Bezos, two things are true. Now you're thinking, next year, I have to do better than a 46% increase when the pandemic is over. And the second piece is that you've now had to watch the entire global retail industry improve its digital capabilities in 18 months. So the calculus has completely changed now for a brand like Amazon, and you could add to that Alibaba, JD.com.
Actually, on your book, you say that Amazon's market share did not increase. Their sales increased, but their market share didn't. So it wasn't about them, doing a great job or a greater job than others. Actually, this woke up many other retailers.
100%, absolutely. And so Amazon, once again, now needs to move into a new phase of its own evolution as well. It has now watched the retail industry evolve, and so it needs to move into a new era at Amazon. And it's my belief, based on research, that era is going to see Amazon go from being sort of this merchant, tech company, data company, to becoming almost like a utility company in the consumer's life. So Amazon, for example, over the last 4 years, Carlos, has made 9 major investments in healthcare. They are building healthcare clinics for their employees. They have digital pharmacy plans. They have bought medical startups, PillPack being one of them. So Amazon is building a massive healthcare ecosystem in an effort to disrupt the healthcare industry, which, as it turns out in the United States, is a pretty easy thing to do because it's a pretty shitty industry in healthcare in the US. So Amazon is targeting healthcare, education, transportation. They have invested in banking and fintech startups, mostly to power their own payments programs at Amazon. But it wouldn't take much for Amazon to say, oh, by the way, you can now have a checking or savings account at Amazon, and here's your Amazon credit card. So all of these apex predators now, and the reason I call them apex predators is because I believe they're moving now to the highest level of their own evolution, where they really have no natural predator or competitors except themselves. They now are going to be essentially trying to take the consumer and put them inside a bubble that the consumer never has to come out of to get anything they want, all the way from an education to healthcare and running shoes and electronics. And that's going to change the competitive imperatives for every other, not just retailer, but I would say every other business on earth.
Wow, wow. Doug nos comparte que en esta pregunta acerca de cómo enfrentarnos a los que él llama los superdepredadores, empresas como Amazon, Alibaba, JD.com y Walmart, que son los retailers más grandes del mundo, sin duda alguna, son superdepredadores porque no hay nadie arriba que ellos, no hay nadie que se los pueda comer, no hay nadie ni arriba ni abajo que pueda competir con ellos, ellos son sus propios competidores. Y la pregunta que le hago es, ¿cómo enfrentarlos a ellos? Y antes de responderme esto, Doug me dice, Amazon creció 46% en el último trimestre, creció sus ventas 46% en el último trimestre. De hecho, en su libro, Doug plantea que el crecimiento de Amazon no se debió a que Amazon haya obtenido más mercado, sino se debió a que Amazon, de hecho, Amazon perdió participación de mercado. Sin embargo, creció tanto el mercado que Amazon creció con ello. Y algo que nos dice Doug es, los retailers más pequeños o los retailers que no son estos superdepredadores se vieron despertados por esta experiencia. Esto fue una llamada de alerta que los hizo entrar en el mundo digital porque no tenían de otra. Y eso implica un reto para Amazon porque ahora estas empresas se están empezando a transformar. Pero lo que dice Doug es, verdaderamente, Amazon no está buscando convertirse o seguir siendo este comerciante o esta empresa de tecnología, sino están buscando convertirse en una burbuja que cubra todas tus necesidades. Nos comparte Doug, Amazon hizo 9 inversiones importantes en términos de salud, en términos de, tiene clínicas de salud que está empezando a construir para sus propios empleados, pero además empresas farmacéuticas o empresas de distribución de medicamentos están recibiendo inversiones de Amazon. Lo que dice Doug es, Amazon quiere convertirse en un ecosistema. Let me ask you a question. In your book, you talk about the new retail. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, so the new retail was a term that was coined by Jack Ma, the chairman of Alibaba, and I believe it was 2015 that Jack Ma used the term "the new retail" for the first time. And essentially, what Ma was saying at the time was that in the West, we had been talking about omni-channel, sort of this notion of building channels to the consumer, and giving the consumer ways to shop with a particular brand. In particular, online versus physical, mobile versus desktop, that sort of thing. But what Jack Ma was saying was he believed that was the wrong way of looking at it. He said, it's not about consumer operating in channels of any kind. It's that what brands need to do is they need to put the consumer at the center of ecosystems and habitats, right? So all what we do is we put the consumer in the center, and then we build all of these different experiences around the consumer, and we give them technology that would allow them then to move freely between these different points of experience. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're really eliminating the whole idea of channels entirely, that he believed that consumers just shop in moments. So his focus was, we have to improve the technology that consumers use to shop. We have to improve our logistics capabilities. We have to be able to get products to consumers wherever they are, whenever they want them. We have to give people new ways to finance their purchases. So really a matter of sort of building these energy sources around consumers that just allow them to navigate these experiences very freely. So I'll give you an example, because you have to kind of imagine this. So Alibaba owns a chain of grocery stores called Fresh Shippo stores. Used to be called Huma stores, but they're called Fresh Shippo. And the stores are a fantastic physical shopping experience. They really are well laid out. There's lots of different experiences within the store. It's a really fun place to shop. But everything is connected by technology. So every conceivable utility that you need is on the Fresh Shippo app. So if you want to learn about a particular product, you can scan it with the app. If you want to find out how fresh a tomato is, you can scan it with the app. If you want to split your order and you want some of it sent to your home and you want to take some with you back to work to have your dinner, you can do that through the app. The store will deliver within a 3-kilometer radius within 30 minutes. So all of their stores are completely technologically infused. There is no difference really between the online shopping experience and the physical experience. There's no distinction made between them, And in the Chinese market, I don't think that consumers in China really even think about going online. They're always online. They're always in a semi-state of connectedness. And that, in essence, is what new retail is all about.
Wow, wow. Le pregunté a Doug qué significa esto del nuevo retail. De hecho, este es un concepto que nos dice Doug, un concepto que creó Jack Ma, el fundador de Alibaba. Y en pocas palabras lo que dice es, eso de omnicanalidad no sirve. El cliente no compra por canales, el cliente compra por momentos. No tenemos que pensar en qué canal va a utilizar para comprar, sino en qué momento está y cómo integro todos los ecosistemas alrededor de él para que pueda tomar su decisión y para que pueda sentir que lo estamos sirviendo como lo necesita. Nos pone el ejemplo, Doc, de Fresh Shippo. Fresh Shippo es una de las empresas de Alibaba que es prácticamente una tienda que tiene integrada la experiencia física y la experiencia digital. Mientras tú estás en esta tienda que está muy bien surtida, que tiene experiencias sociales, etcétera, 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 al mismo tiempo estás en tu teléfono y puedes consultar información de los productos, puedes decidir qué productos te quieres llevar contigo y qué productos quieres que te entreguen en tu casa, mismos que te van a entregar en tu casa en 30 minutos después de, si estás en 3 kilómetros de radio, te los van a entregar en 30 minutos. Let me ask you a question, Doug. Should we try to imitate them? Should the smaller companies try to imitate whatever these apex retailers are doing, or is there a different strategy?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, put it this way. I have never seen a company that has attempted to go head to head with Amazon, playing by the same rules as Amazon, and win, right? I've never seen that happen.
There's the story of diapers.com, right?
Exactly.
They forced them to sell the company at whatever price they told them.
Absolutely. And I mean, country after country after country where Amazon has gone in, I have heard people inside those countries say, but we have this online retailer and they're the dominant player in our market, right? And we don't think that they're going to lose market share to Amazon. And then consistently, Amazon takes market share from those competitors. They simply either outspend them or they lower prices to the point where the other competitor can't even survive. So then what do you do? Understanding that you can't beat Amazon at their own game, what do you do? And my belief is this, Carlos. Most brands, let's face it, most brands are never going to be able to create an ecosystem that includes banking and healthcare and shipping and transportation and insurance and education, right? It's just not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that a brand can't create an extremely powerful media ecosystem around its brand. But the first step in doing that is determining what the story is. What's the message that you're trying to convey to consumers that is unique and valuable? And the way I think your listeners and viewers today need to think about this is like this. You need to start by asking a question about your own brand. And the question is, if your brand is the answer, what is the question? What is the question that consumers are asking that you are the exclusive or definitive answer to in your market? You need to be able to answer that question first
Can you
before
give us
you
an
can.
example?
Yeah, sure. So if we take an example like Patagonia apparel. So Patagonia does not try to be all things to all people. They don't go to the market with 10 different messages about who they are. You know, it's not price one day and product the next day and shopping experience the next day. Patagonia is a brand that has from the very beginning been committed to environmental activism. Everything that that company does is aimed at creating environmental improvement. Their products are different. Their people are different. Their programs to support the environment are different. And as a consequence, there can be no doubt in the consumer's mind as to what Patagonia is all about. So in the book, I talk about 10 specific retail archetypes, archetypal business models, each of which answers a very clear question that consumers may be asking in the market. And in that scenario, Patagonia is an activist brand. It's a brand that puts environmental concern and cause at the heart of everything that it does. From there, and you'll see this if you go to Patagonia's website, the story begins to unfold. They tell that story every day through their physical stores, through their websites, through their people, their products, and their programs, everything aimed at that one message. Now, if I were to talk about Nike, I would say, well, Nike isn't necessarily what I would call an activist brand, but they are definitely a brand that trades on human stories, right? Whether it's stories about racial injustice and equality or perseverance, pushing yourself through failure. These are some of the stories that a Nike tells. So Nike is a storyteller brand. And that is how they compete. It's not because Nike doesn't really sell running shoes. They sell stories. And we as consumers buy into those stories. And the product is basically a souvenir. So that's the first step for brands. You can't just say, well, we'll just try and sell more online, or we'll try and improve our customer experience. You need to revisit who you are. What is your story? And once you arrive at that story, you need to begin to tell it through every single piece of content, whether it's online or in the physical world. It needs to reinforce that story for consumers.
Doug, thank you, Doug. So, Doug me dice, no existe ninguna compañía que haya podido enfrentar a Amazon en su país y le haya podido ganar. No existe ninguna compañía que haya podido quedarse con, digamos que, con parte del mercado de Amazon. Siempre que Amazon llega, quizás reducen sus precios muchísimo o gastan mucho más en publicidad de lo que puede gastar su competidor. Así que, además de esto, ninguna de las empresas que nos está escuchando aquí va a poder tener un ecosistema completo como el que tiene Amazon o como el que tiene alguno de sus competidores. No vas a poder tener un ecosistema que incluya salud y que incluya servicios financieros y que incluya entregas. Sabemos que Amazon ya tiene su propio servicio de logística. Así que la respuesta que da Doug es, en vez de ponerte a pelear con Sansón a las patadas, como decimos, lo que tienes que hacer es hacer un paso atrás y definir quién es tu marca, cuál es la historia que vas a contar y cuál es el mensaje que vas a transmitir. Doug hace la siguiente pregunta. Lo que tienes que cuestionarte es, si tu marca es la respuesta, ¿cuál es la pregunta? Le pedí a Doug que nos diera algunos ejemplos al respecto y nos dice, un ejemplo de una marca que ha creado consistencia con una identidad es Patagonia. Patagonia constantemente transmite a través de sus mensajes que es una empresa que promueve la ecología. No promueve hoy que son baratos, mañana que son chistosos y pasado mañana que son accesibles o que son de lujo. Todo el tiempo promueve el activismo ecológico. Todo el tiempo promueve que están cuidando el ambiente. Y eso es lo que hace que el cliente conecte con Patagonia. Asimismo, nos pone un segundo ejemplo, que es el ejemplo de Nike. Nike es una empresa que cuenta historias. Ellos conectan con los clientes a través de contar historias, ya sea de injusticia racial, ya sea historias de superación de alguien que alcanzó una meta. Y el producto, los tenis, la playera que les compramos, es solamente un souvenir. Okay, Doc, so I get it. You have these 10 archetypes of the new era of retail, and companies need to find their own. Let me ask you a question. There are companies who haven't had an archetype before. There are companies who have, I don't know, they've taken advantage of the last era of retail in which you grew because you had the product, you had the store, and you were there to serve customers. But now that's not enough. My question is, how can you find your archetype? Second question, can you fake it? Can you
fake it?
Yeah. Yeah. Can I fake that I have any of these archetypes when it's not actually my purpose as a businessman or as a company?
Really good question. So the first question is, how do you find your archetype? So what I've done in the book is I've taken these 10 archetypes, all of which, again, are very, very different. They all have a different sort of purpose, if you will. And when I say purpose, I mean purpose to the consumer. They answer a specific consumer question. So 10 of them, all very different. But what I've also done is I've divided those 10 archetypes into 4 competitive quadrants. So imagine, if you will, there's a circle here, and we have 4 quadrants. And so the first quadrant is culture. These are brands that really trade on human values, right? So again, Nike talking about social injustice and equality, Patagonia talking about the environment, right? Brands that trade on values. The second quadrant is entertainment. These are brands that may not necessarily sell something that you can't find anywhere else, and maybe you can even find some of their products on Amazon, but they create such an entertaining experience around those products that it's really the experience that the consumer is shopping them for. That's the second quadrant. The third quadrant is expertise. This is when the consumer really just wants to talk to someone who knows everything there is to know about a particular product or a particular category, or they want a service experience that is just, fantastic. They go to an expertise retailer. And then finally, the last quadrant is product. And a lot of people today will say that, well, you can't compete on the basis of product alone. You need more than just product. Well, I'm not so sure. Dyson vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, they have basically built a brand on the idea of creating superior products that have a superior level of engineering and quality. And that's why you pay $300 or $400 US for a hair dryer at Dyson. But that is their competitive angle. So those 4 quadrants allow a brand who maybe doesn't know what archetype they are to at least begin to sort of navigate to a quadrant. Are we a values-based brand? Are we about the entertainment value of our experience? Is it about expertise? Or is it really just about our product and the superior nature of our product? So that's a starting point, at least. Now, the second part of your question is, can you fake it? Very, very, very difficult. It's difficult. In the same way that, if you're trying to have an intimate relationship with your spouse, but you're keeping secrets from them, you generally know, right? There's something that just doesn't feel right. So whatever choice you make, really does have to come from a place of organizational authenticity. You need to really believe that this archetype embodies our story. You know, it is who we are, and we can convincingly tell this story to our customers, and they'll believe that it's genuine. You know, so it's vitally important. Yeah.
Thank you. Le pregunté a Doc cómo le hago para encontrar mi arquetipo. Si este arquetipo es el camino para que yo me separe y me diferencie de estos superdepredadores del retail, ¿cómo le hago para encontrarlo? Y una respuesta que nos da es que él clasifica estos 10 arquetipos, que por cierto pueden encontrar en su libro. Él clasifica estos 10 arquetipos en 4 cuadrantes principales. El cuadrante número 1 son empresas de cultura, son empresas que basan su mensaje en valores, en los valores que quieren transmitir. Y como estos ejemplos, nos habla de Nike o de Patagonia, que tienen un valor que transmitir. El segundo ejemplo son empresas basadas en entretenimiento, cuyos productos no necesariamente son superiores a los de la industria, quizás son productos que puedes obtener de Amazon o de alguno de sus competidores, pero que te dan una experiencia diferente, que te entretiene, que te dan un servicio espectacular, ¿de acuerdo? Ese es el siguiente cuadrante. El que sigue es el cuadrante de conocimiento, de expertise, lo llama él. Son estas experiencias en las cuales sabes que vas a ir a hablar con un sabio, con un conocedor, y que esa es la razón por la que le vas a comprar esta marca. Y finalmente nos dice, aunque para muchos no existe, aunque para muchos es difícil de lograr, existe la alternativa de estar en el cuadrante del producto. Y pone como ejemplo esta compañía Dyson, que es esta compañía que vende secadoras de pelo, aspiradoras, etcétera, etcétera, que tienen una característica de diseño en su producto extraordinaria y que eso es lo que los hace diferentes. Después, bueno, entonces lo primero que dice Doug es, con estos 4 cuadrantes puedes empezar a encontrar en dónde está tu identidad o con qué identidad te sientes, valga la redundancia, identificado. Por otro lado, le pregunté a Doc si esto se puede fingir. Si puedo fingir que tengo un arquetipo, si puedo ponerme el disfraz de una empresa basada en cultura o una empresa basada en entretenimiento. Y lo que dice Doc es, verdaderamente no se puede. Lo primero que tienes que tener es autenticidad organizacional, es decir, que verdaderamente sea lo que tu empresa promueve en realidad. Solamente así vas a poder demostrarlo. Y nos pone como ejemplo lo que ocurre cuando estás casado con tu pareja. Si le estás ocultando algo a tu pareja, quizás en algún momento podrá pasar desapercibido, pero eventualmente se va a dar cuenta. Doug, they ask me here if you can give us an example of a company in the entertainment quadrant.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this, if anyone listening is ever in New York City, then I highly encourage you to visit a brand called Camp, CAMP. Camp is a store that many people have said is the toy store that Toys R Us should have been. But the interesting thing is, Camp is not really a conventional toy store at all. It was the brainchild of a fellow named Ben Kaufman, who was actually the marketing vice president for BuzzFeed. And Ben lives in New York City with his wife and their child. And he was thinking at one point, you know, I wonder where my wife and I could go with our child, just to have fun, just to sort of hang out and have fun in New York City. And he realized how few places there were where a parent could just really go somewhere with their child and spend some time and enjoy themselves. So he came up with the idea for this toy store called Camp. And the interesting thing about Camp is that only about 400 square meters of Camp space is actually a toy store. But when you go behind a secret door in the store, you enter into a space that is about 4 or 5 times that size. And it's really just a black box theater of experiences. And the experiences change. So the theme might change. So they might have cooking camp one month, where you can take your child in and they can play all sorts of games. They can play with toys that are all sort of themed around cooking. They have live events, they have entertainment, they have singing and dancing and camp counselors. And of course, the children get to play with all of these toys, which usually results in parents having to buy those toys when they leave the store. So camp is again a company where I don't think there's very much at camp that you couldn't find elsewhere, but people go for the experience. The experience is the product. And what's interesting too is that because camp is so focused on experiences, they are really re-engineering not just the physical in-store toy buying experience, but also the online experience. And I'll give you an example. They just developed a program that will allow children as little as 3 years old to shop online, but to do so safely and to do so with their parents' permission. They essentially create an account for the child that the parent can reload, and they can go on and buy their own birthday gifts or buy a gift for a friend of theirs, and they can shop, online at a very young age. So that's the kind of work that camp does. They really engineer unique experiences. And so are they worried about Amazon? Really? Because the person going to Amazon and buying a toy for their kid is not the camp customer to begin with. So in doing that, they have really created a strong defense against Amazon or frankly anyone else.
Wow. Bueno, de acuerdo a la pregunta que nos hicieron, Doug nos cuenta el caso de una empresa que está en este cuadrante del entretenimiento. Y nos habla de, can you call it a toy store? What is it? I was going to say the camp, the toy store, but it's not.
It's a toy experience store. Let's call it that.
Nos habla de una compañía llamada Camp, que es desde su punto de vista una tienda de experiencia con juguetes, que desde su punto de vista es la tienda en la que Toys R Us debió convertirse, que les hubiera evitado quebrar. En pocas palabras, es una tienda que tiene 400 metros cuadrados de piso de venta, pero tiene 4 veces más espacio en la parte de atrás, detrás de una puerta secreta en la cual hay un camp. ¿Qué es este camp? Es un espacio donde hay temas cada mes y en donde quizás hay ejercicios digamos que experiencias de canto, experiencias de teatro, de cocina, de baile, etcétera, etcétera, que además permiten que los niños jueguen con los juguetes. Eso generalmente lleva a los papás a tener que pagar por los juguetes. Como dice Doc, la experiencia es el producto que ellos están vendiendo. Y nos cuenta algo muy curioso que es lo que hace esta compañía, que incluso buscó llevar esa experiencia amigable y divertida para los niños de un punto de venta físico a una experiencia digital. Y hoy tienen una experiencia en la cual un niño puede ingresar a internet y puede comprar el regalo de su amiguito o puede comprar un regalo para sí mismo con una membresía propia para el niño, de acuerdo con la supervisión del padre, pero que sigue extendiendo esta experiencia digital, esta experiencia extraordinaria en el mundo digital. Doug, this brings out a question in my mind. So it all sounds very good. So I'm going to have a 2,000 square meter store in New York City, and I'm going to have dancing and singing and cooking and blah, 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 blah. This guy, Ben Kaufman, the founder of Camp, how the hell do you measure or can you expect success beforehand? Because this might be, I'm sure this was a huge investment. And I think that maybe there are a lot of retailers that don't go into this kind of, adventures because it's expensive and it goes out of what they know already. So how can you measure the value of an experience before you actually implement it?
Great question. So there's a couple things in there. First of all, it's worth noting that a lot of Ben's revenue comes from live events. It comes from ticket sales, it comes from subscriptions, and they do significant online sales as well at camp. So the revenue from the toy store is there, but it doesn't need to be significant in order for the concept to succeed. But you raise a really important question, Carlos, and that is around this idea of risk, taking a risk, and the willingness of companies to take a risk. And I'll give you a good example. What I think is a good example. I'll tell you a story. So in and around 2018, I want to say 2019, Macy's made an acquisition of a much, much, much smaller company, a company in New York called Story. And Story was a small store that essentially did very much like what Camp does, but they did it for adults. So every 4 weeks, the theme in the store changed. There were new events, new demonstrations, new products, completely new merchandising setups. Essentially, the store would transform every 4 to 6 weeks. And the store revenue, most of the revenue actually came from paid sponsorships. So Procter & Gamble, for example, might sponsor the store for 4 to 6 weeks and run a promotion that was, a story aimed at men, let's say, so it'd be all the things that men might find appealing or interesting. Rachel Shechtman was the lady that founded Story, and on a per square foot basis, by my numbers, by my estimates, on a per square foot basis, she was selling more product than Macy's in their
Wow.
department stores.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, she was selling approximately on an annual basis something in the range of $2,200 a square foot. They were performing at about $210 a square foot. So she was 10x their revenue. Now, and I wrote about this in Reengineering Retail, and on the heels of that, and I sort of did the math to show that the performance, here's what experiences can drive in terms of revenue versus a traditional old department store. So on the heels of that, Macy's turned around and they acquired Story. Now, they could have done something really, really amazing there. They could have taken a full department store and handed the keys to Rachel Shechtman and said, lady, go work your magic, right? Turn this store, this huge store, into a story. But they didn't do that. They didn't have the courage to do that. What they said to Rachel was, here's 2,000 square feet in one of our stores.
You need balls to do that. I mean, it's
right.
Not easy.
It's not easy. Somebody's got to sign off on it, right? So they said, here's 2,000 square feet, develop a marketplace of some kind for us here. And Rachel did, a phenomenal job of doing that. But that wasn't really what Macy's needed. Macy's needed a complete reinvention of their economic model. And they had it right in their hand. They could have done it, but they just didn't have the courage. So there was an example of somebody that had already proven that the concept worked. We just needed to scale it up to a larger size, but the courage wasn't there to do that. So, I think on the one hand, that is usually the problem, is that it's just the organizational courage to experiment, to try something, and the willingness to fail if necessary in order to learn.
Wow. Or right now, maybe in order to survive.
Or in order to survive. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, no one would argue that the department store model, for the most part, I know it's certainly more robust in Mexico than it is in the United States or Canada, but nonetheless, I think we'd all agree that it needs to come into the 21st century.
Wow. So, le pregunté a Doug acerca de cómo tomas esa decisión, porque se oye muy bonito, voy a convertir una tienda de juguetes y voy a tener un gran espacio para hacer experiencias de canto, de cocina, etcétera, etcétera. Pero ¿cómo te atreves a hacer un cambio como ese? Y lo que dice Doug es que sin duda alguna, pues el riesgo juega un papel muy importante. Nos contó que en el caso de Camp, esta empresa de la que nos platicaba, sus ingresos no solamente vienen, de hecho, una parte importante de sus ingresos no viene de la venta de juguetes, sino viene de ingresos adicionales por las experiencias, venta de suscripciones o venta de boletos para eventos. Y nos cuenta la historia de una compañía llamada Story. que fue adquirida, fue comprada por Macy's en 2018. Esta es una empresa que básicamente lo que hacía era crear este tipo de experiencias que escuchamos con el caso de Camp, pero específicamente para adultos. Y tenía sus ingresos principalmente por patrocinios de marcas como Procter & Gamble o alguna marca que quisiera crear una experiencia para sus clientes, y básicamente esta tienda se convertía, o este espacio se convertía en una experiencia relacionada con hombres o con algún atributo relacionado con la marca. De hecho, nos cuenta Doug que Story, esta tienda, tenía 10 veces más ventas por metro cuadrado de lo que tenía Macy's. 10 veces más ventas por metro cuadrado de lo que tenía Macy's. Y que incluso lo que hicieron, bueno, una vez que Macy's adquirió a Story, le dijeron a la dueña, Rachel Sheckman, le dijeron, bueno, te vamos a dar este espacio para que hagas más o menos lo que hacías en tu negocio. Sin embargo, lo hicieron con muchas limitaciones porque les faltó esa valentía, les faltó la voluntad de atreverse a fallar. Entonces, en pocas palabras, Doug nos dice, tienes que estar dispuesto a experimentar y tienes que estar dispuesto a fallar en estos cambios de experiencia. Doug nos decía, tienes que hacerlo si quieres crecer. Y le respondí, tienes que hacerlo si quieres sobrevivir en muchos casos. Doug, let me go into one of the final questions. You mentioned that in order for you to get, or for the customers to see your archetype, that you have to take care of the content of your brand. And here I want to go into one of the articles that you published a couple of months ago or so, which is the concept of editorial brands. When you say that brands are magazines first and merchants second. Can you expand on that? What's the type of content that a company should be generating, and how powerful can that be?
Great question. So I'll just tell you a really quick story just to sort of illustrate. One of the things that I enjoy are watches. I like collecting them, wearing them, that sort of thing. They just interest me. So a few years ago, I became aware of a brand, an editorial brand called Hodinkee. I'm sure there are some folks in the Mexican market that have heard of them and probably subscribe to them. So Hodinkee was a brand that was started in 2008 by a fellow named Ben Clymer. And Ben had an interest in watches. He was working in the financial industry at the time. Now, 2008, the financial crisis, Ben was on the brink of losing his job. And he decided to start a blog about wristwatches. And he started with a story about a wristwatch that his grandfather left to him that sort of ignited his passion for watches. And then he decided, I'm going to attend journalism school. I'm going to learn how to write well, and so he did that. And then he started Hodinkee. And it was really an editorial brand that was going to go deep, deep, deep into watches and timepieces and the history and, all of the technical specifications, really a geeky sort of site about watches. Well, he found an audience. And not only did he find an audience, his audience was going from like 100,000 to 1 million to 5 million. He was gathering followers like crazy. He built out Hodinkee into a real media empire around wristwatches. And then in 2018, he decided that he was going to change the revenue model at Hodinkee. He wanted to rely less on advertising for revenue and become more self-sufficient. So he decided to open a watch marketplace. Now, if anyone watching this goes to hodinkee.com right now and looks at their watch marketplace, you will notice that most of what they sell is sold out. And we're not talking about watches that are $100 or $500. Some of these are $50,000, $60,000 watches. But the reason that Hodinkee is able to be so successful selling watches and they're doing about $10 million a month in watches. The reason they're able to do that is because people trust them. People trust that they have a level of knowledge and authority in their category that is just unmatched, right? Now, I can go to Amazon and I can buy a pre-owned Rolex. There are about 1,000 watches on Amazon right now, pre-owned certified Rolex watches. Would I do that? Absolutely not. If I was going to make a purchase like that, I would make it from Hodinkee because I trust them. I trust their authority and I trust their integrity. So what this sort of illustrates to me is that there really is a huge opportunity for editorial brands, whether they be in beauty or fashion or luxury or automobiles, to come into the retail market and bring all that content with them. But the other opportunity is for retailers to get into the content business and to realize that ultimately what distinguishes you from Amazon or Mercado Libre or Alibaba or anyone else is the quality of your content, the depth of your content. So if you can be better and deeper than Amazon will ever choose to go, you won't have to worry about that, you know? And again, you're feeding your customers this steady diet of amazing content so that when they do decide to make that purchase, boom, you're top of mind. And that is essentially what I mean when I say build out a media ecosystem for your consumers to live inside.
Wow. Le pedí a Doug que nos comparta acerca de un artículo que escribió hace algunos meses en el cual él habla acerca de las marcas editoriales. Él dice que una marca que construye un negocio editorial como si fuera una revista y que logra posicionar contenido profundo en la mente de sus clientes, es una marca que genera confianza para que los clientes le quieran comprar a ella. Nos contó la historia de Hodinkee, hodinkee.com, los invito a que lo busquen, Hodinkee, hodinkee.com, que es una empresa que nació inicialmente como un blog que hablaba de relojes, y posteriormente creó su marketplace de relojes y hoy vende muchísimo dinero de relojes. De hecho, si entran ustedes a la página, nos dice Doug, van a encontrar que la mayoría de sus relojes están agotados. El valor está en el contenido que generó y la confianza que generó con sus clientes. Él dice, a medida que tú puedas llegar a un mayor nivel de profundidad y de calidad en el contenido, de lo que lo puede hacer Amazon o cualquier competidor, vas a generar una relación superior con tus clientes de lo que cualquier otro puede generar. Básicamente, esta generación de esta relación a través del contenido y de la educación que puedas darle a tus clientes se convierte en tu diferenciador, se convierte en esa pieza de tu estrategia que te puede blindar en contra de el nuevo Mercado Libre o de Amazon o de cualquier otro competidor. It's great, and I really love your point of view on that, and I believe that's part of the formula to actually survive and to be able to compete with this with these predators, these huge companies.
I think, Carlos, I mean, and I think I say this in the book too, if your current position is based on, if your current competitive position is based on selling an undifferentiated product, or if you compete solely on the basis of price, or even if you compete on the basis of convenience as we know it today, right? I mean, we could say OXXO stores are super convenient today, right? But if those are your real competitive fronts, whether it's price, product, or convenience, you're going to have a really, really hard 10 years ahead of your business. But if you can identify a question that consumers are asking, if you can become the answer to that question, and if you can build content that people thoroughly enjoy and that appeals to the reason that they're shopping you in the first place, then you have a fighting chance. You know, you can compete in the shadows of these giants and do so very, very successfully, just as Patagonia is doing, just as Nike is doing. And to put a point on it, Nike's sales have doubled through the pandemic. They've doubled. Nike's share price over the last 4 years has tripled, right?
Wow.
Their market capitalization has tripled. Patagonia's sales are robust. Camp is opening new stores in New York City in the middle, and we're still in the pandemic. They're opening new stores. So competing and winning is possible, but you can't compete according to the same rules.
Wow. I'm going to close with that because I think it's the main point of this discussion. Lo que dice Doug es, si tu negocio está basado en competir por precio, por producto o por conveniencia, estás prácticamente condenado al fracaso. Porque estás compitiendo con empresas que tienen mucho mayor cantidad de recursos para reducir precios, para tener mejores productos y mejor capacidad de distribución y mayor conveniencia que tú. Pero lo que dice Doug es, identifica una pregunta que tus clientes están haciendo y conviértete en la mejor empresa en responder esa pregunta. Y la pregunta no es qué producto voy a comprar o dónde voy a conseguir un reloj. Identifica cuál es la pregunta, cuál es esa necesidad que están buscando satisfacer y conviértete en la mejor marca para responder a esa pregunta. Y después, conviértete en esa marca que genera todo el contenido alrededor de esa pregunta que tus clientes están buscando responder. De esa forma, de acuerdo con lo que dice Doc, vas a poder crecer incluso a pesar de Mercado Libre, Amazon, Alibaba, etcétera, 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 o cualquier competidor grande que llames en tu industria. Doug, this was a real pleasure. But before we end, can you please tell us where can we find you? Where can we find your book? And where can we keep listening to your ideas?
Sure thing. And it's a pleasure to be with you, Carlos. I have to say you're a fantastic interviewer, and I always enjoy our conversations. Your listeners can find me at retailprofit.com, and that's PROPHET.com, retailprofit.com. The book is available, of course, online, but you, I'm sure, can also find it in bookstores around places like Mexico City, perhaps. So not translated yet into Spanish. If there's anyone out there in the audience that would like to take that on, I would love to have a copy of the book out in Spanish, but you can certainly get the English version online or in most bookstores.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me just translate that. Doug nos dice, pueden encontrarlo, le pregunto dónde lo pueden encontrar, luego de esta conversación tan valiosa. Pueden encontrar a Doug en retailprofit.com. Profit es P-R-O-P-H-E-T. Retailprofit.com. Por ahí teníamos la pregunta de en qué libro están estos cuadrantes y estos arquetipos. Están en este libro, Resurrecting Retail. Que lo pueden encontrar principalmente en línea. Dice que quizás ya está en alguna librería en México. Y bueno, pues pueden seguir a Doug en las redes sociales. Lo encuentran como Retail Profit. Muchísimas gracias a todos por participar. Espero que esto sirva para todos los que están aquí presentes para abrir los ojos, para entender que la era del retail en la que vivíamos hace 2 años no es igual a la que vivimos el día de hoy. Y bueno, aquí tienen un mapa, una serie de guías que les dicen hacia dónde hay que moverse para transformar a sus empresas y verdaderamente poder llegar a trascender a pesar del crecimiento de grandes empresas en el retail y de las transformaciones que nos traiga esta pandemia o lo que nos traiga el futuro. Doug, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.
Muchas gracias.